Hello everybody, welcome to Handmade Hero, show where we code a complete game live on stream. We are going to be doing a bunch of surprise streams all throughout December here, and well, I guess late November, in honor of Krampuslof, which of course is the Krampus run. As you know, Krampus plays a big role in Handmade Hero, and one of the things that is celebrated regretfully only overseas. As far as I know, we do not have a Krampuslof here in the U.S. that I have seen. Definitely not in Seattle that I've ever seen. But basically, what it is it's a bunch of people dress up like Krampus, and they run around the streets chasing little children around because I don't know. They want to scare their children, I guess, for some reason. It sounds fantastically creepy and exactly the sort of thing that I think would be cool. And so we have always sort of structured something around Krampus time for Handmade Hero, and I think it's December 5th traditionally, so it's coming up here. So anyway, we're going to do a bunch of streams, extra streams, and we're not necessarily going to be doing anything out of the ordinary on these streams. It should just still be normal programming, although we may do a couple crazy things because we have more streams. Maybe we'll do some Handmade Ray at some point. Maybe we'll do some other stuff. I don't know. We'll see. But for today, we're just going to do straightforward Handmade Hero because we had a bunch of stuff we wanted to do that we were in the middle of. So we're going to jump right into that. And let's talk a little bit about what that is. So if I load up our sort of current state of Handmade Hero, then as you know, what we did the previous couple of weeks is we've done a bunch of work on art pipeline stuff because we have a bunch of art we want to put in the game. And it works pretty well now, except for the fact that we don't have annotation really ability. Oh, that's a little surprise for later. If you are wondering why the PHP interpreter is runnable on here, there's going to be a little surprise with that at some point as well. But we'll talk about that later. So what we want to do here is take a look at the annotation stuff that we need and figure out ways that we can make those annotations editable in game. And specifically what I'm talking about is, for example, we tried loading in cat art asset data here. And what you can see is, although our pipeline works just fine loading in all of our art assets now, we don't have any ways of doing stuff like saying how big the cat should be, so it's way too large. And we don't have any way of properly snapping the cat together, where say like the head piece goes on top of the body piece and so on. There could be ways of doing this externally if you have a different tool chain. So for example, if your artists work with something like Spriter or something like Flash, then you can potentially use those file formats, have data in them that you might use for this purpose. But our art assets are just made in Photoshop, which means there is no bone data, there's no skeleton data that we can look to give us that information. As a result, we need to sort of augment the data that comes in with that information. So we need the ability to make those point definitions and those size definitions ourselves, since Photoshop really doesn't do it. And so what we want to do is just have that ability. We added the ability to specify those things to our file format. What we haven't done yet is make a way to actually edit them, but we have done a bunch of work along those lines. You can pick things in the game now, so I can select things, and we even made it so that our little debug UI here that we've been using for various things is now sort of accessible outside as an actual editing tool as well. And so we're sort of poised to allow editing in these things, but we have not actually done the implementation of it. So what we need to do now is we need to go implement some of that UI so that we can actually edit those elements of our art assets that just don't exist anywhere at the moment. There is no existing data we can load, so we have to create it ourselves, which is fairly common in games. It's not unusual at all that a game cannot rely entirely on art tools or the source art tools in this particular case in question to produce the complete set of data that they need. So augmenting art with data specific to a game that is not commonly set up in the art tool from whence the data arrives, that's not really unusual. It's actually very common. So I'm going to load up, oops, no I'm not, because I'm going to spell it wrong. I'm going to load up Handmade in-game editor and just zoom down to the bottom there and show you kind of what's going on here. Inside Asset Editor, we wrote the code already that would sort of lay out this stuff. We say, like, here's the alignment points for this thing, and, you know, here's some editing operations you might do on them. And then we also have a UI kind of starting here, right here in Dev UI. You can see we sort of got the beginnings of a system that would allow us to edit these things. But a lot of these functions, all we did is we just stubbed them out. So, you know, this code compiles, but when it actually goes to run any of the things that would do the work, it really doesn't end up doing anything. And so our primary job is going to be to make it so that these things actually work and allow us to actually edit the stuff in question. And there's two ways we can really go about doing it. And it's unclear at the moment anyway which way we really want to do. So our job is kind of twofold, is to make sure that we pick a good way and then to actually do that way. And if we take a look in here and we look at what we had for the debug UI, what we can see on here is we've got sort of layout stuff that already was written to do a lot of the things that we might want to do. So you can kind of see here when you call one of these debug UI functions, not the dev UI functions, but debug UI functions, they were capable of producing information that actually looks, if you take a look at it here, you can see that it's not particularly specific to the debug system anymore. So I think what we want to do here is kind of merge these things in, and really it's this part right here that makes this specific to the debug system. And so figuring out how to maybe make that not be the case anymore. So pulling this out of the debug system and making it so that it can operate in both realms might just be the most effective way to go, because we kind of just need the same stuff in both. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of reason why we would want to implement that stuff twice. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to look through the debug state and see what is actually getting used. Now, you can see here a lot of the stuff is very generic, and it would be really easy to pull it out. It's not specific to debugging at all. It's things like the font scale and the font information, these sorts of things, really pretty basic. And so I think, unless I see something surprising further down, it's really the interaction tracking, the render group. These are things that would be common to both systems for sure. And just looking at them here, it really does seem like we could totally pull this out of the debug system. So, I mean, I think that's sort of a no-brainer in terms of at least these functions. So I think that's kind of what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow the same pattern that we used on the previous stream, where basically I said, look, let's take the debug state out of this equation. Let's find out what breaks. We'll repair it in the debug system, and then we'll move it over to the other UI system. So what I'm going to do is exactly that. I'm sort of going to say, look, let's get rid of this line here. Let's see what has to happen. We're going to assume we'll get this, because this is the thing that we knew that we needed to do stuff like draw text. So what I'm going to say is, let's go ahead and just merge this over and then force the debug system to use it, right? So I'm going to ice it out of there, put it in here. We're going to call this a dev UI layout and deal with the fallout from that. And we're going to call this here, where we've got sort of the thing that we were back pointing to, we're going to call that the context. So we're going to say, again, just step by step extricating that piece of code from its original context in which it was created. We're basically saying, look, what are its actual connections to the debug system? Sever those, and now we'll have both systems be able to use it by just passing the actual data from the debug system that was necessary in that way both systems can just keep that kind of data and feed it upwards, rather than having this system be sort of inexorably tied to the debug system, because as we saw, we actually did a pretty nice job writing it originally. It wasn't, spaghetti-like. It wasn't intertwined in there in a way that really makes it difficult to pull out. So it turns out it's actually pretty easy. So our goal here is going to be, to extricate that out, and then also here, just say, let's go ahead and grab all of this code. And so essentially what we're going to do here, I think, is nuke this file, because mostly there isn't anything in here that actually is specific to the debug code. You look, and I just don't see very much of that in here. There really isn't... like I'm just not seeing much in the way of debug specific code here. So I think we may be able to just kind of say, look, all this stuff comes over, and then these files may just go away. We may not have them anymore in the first place, right? So we're going to drop those in here, and then we're going to deal with the fallout. So let's take a look at where all the errors start out. Again, a big thing is just going to be renaming here. Obviously, we've sort of got some things that we changed the name of. So in this case here, we've got sort of some stuff that's gonna change. But that's pretty basic. So I can go in here and just do a bulk rename on that, and that won't really be a big deal. So anywhere that we saw layout before, I can change that to a dev UI layout now, and that should be pretty simple here, right? So let's just take a look. So a layout element should probably be a dev UI layout element as well. That's probably true. So, just to be clear, because layout element, let's be honest, doesn't really scope it down particularly much. Oops, we're now into the code that actually already had that. So, we probably should do the modicum of work there that's necessary to just sort of make sure that's named in a way that makes it unambiguous about who we're talking about. Layout, pretty generic term, so you know how it is. So in here where we've got debug IDs are equal, that really should be dev UI, because these are dev IDs now, I believe. So I didn't know we forgot to rename that, but it looks like we did. So if we take a look here at where that's happening in sort of the debug ID space here, we probably just want that to be placed somewhere more specific. So let me see, dev ID, I don't know where we've actually got that defined here. We can say there if that's something that people want to be able to do. We'll just say you can do it. Okay, so that should take care of that. Now let's go back to what I was doing before. So again, in here we kind of have this notion of an interaction that's currently the one that's being used. And that's something that I think we want to pull out into that context, right? So what we want to do is we want to say that inside, it's permanent state, really. So I think we probably want to say that this is the permanent state that's sort of being kept, for the most part. So I don't know, we could, if we wanted to be really discreet about it, we could do this and have another one in there. I just don't know if we care. So it's okay to be a little piggy here, I think. I'm not really assuming that there's going to be a whole lot of wastage there, really. So I think we could probably say hot interaction here. And then you could just say, look, if you know what the context is that you're using, just pass me that, and we'll check it off there, and off we go, right? I think that should basically do it. And then all of these things here for text out at and get text size and so on. I'm not sure what we want to pass in there, but chances are when we look at what's going on here, you can see that these are sort of cracking routines that really we're just getting the dev UI context anyway. Whether we want to keep those or not, I don't know, but I suspect we probably don't. I think it's probably fine to just add an arrow for the people who are calling these. So I think we could probably say is, look, let's just make this be something that passes the context in the first place. And then that way, first of all, this is not necessary, so I don't know why that's even there. But then what we can do is just say, look, like pass that in, and off we go. And if we really want to make a helper function later for that, fine. but at the moment I don't really think it's necessary, because I don't think people are calling this so often that we need to do that, that they couldn't just use this format for their call. You know what I'm saying? All right, so that's, you know, just the easiest way to deal with keeping these functions usable in both contexts, pun intended, I suppose. And I think that just continues to cascade down through a lot of these. So a lot of these things where you were taking a debug state, nowadays you're just taking a context, because the context has this stuff explicitly, right? It's got the font scale in it, it's got the font info in it, and so any of these things that had to happen here will just work. I'm going to move this over to the front just to keep a consistent ordering for it. You can see here, these are basically similar routines that just use the font scale to modify whatever the font parameters are. So having them in two different formats just made it confusing. And I'll update our type nomenclature here too while I'm at it. Someday we should just go through and like change everything to F3 too, because that's that's my jam. I'm done with R. R is done. F is the new R. So anyway, this looks pretty much intact, right? That's just going to remain the same as it was. All of these, I think, same thing. So we really get down back to here again, where we're doing this begin layout action. And again, that's going to probably take a context now and just replace that debug state with the context there. So something like that. And when we look at what's going on in here, this all should be still the same, right? So all that stuff, I think, ends up being pretty clean. Now we have in here end layout. And I assume we also had a begin layout in here somewhere. I don't know where that was originally. Did we have one? I don't even know where that was. Maybe we didn't. I don't know. So we maybe didn't have that one, so maybe this is all just fine. End layout isn't going to do anything, so that's fine too. So all of this stuff seems pretty reasonable so far. Yeah, so we're going to have to change a couple of these things, how they work internally. We'll let the errors guide us there. Just looking at this stuff, and it all looks, again, pretty clean. The tooltip buffer stuff, that's probably going to be something that gets moved up a bit. So, you know, tooltip buffer is just a string. We already have that type, so we should probably, while we're at it, change that around, because that's not really necessary either. I mean, you can see right here that it really is just one of these. So that's a good, oops. So that's really, I mean, right? Look familiar? So we really don't need to have it work this way. We can probably just reuse this type and have everyone who does counted memory blocks just use that as we sort of go. So that I'm not going to change yet, but I'm going to probably change it before long. And again, we'll get to there when we get to there. All right, so let's jump back to the error hunt now. I'm going to go take a look at this P32 here. What's the problem? Cannot convert argument 1. So interactions are equal is what exactly? It's a, okay. All right, so that dev UI interaction looks like it's getting actually copied in there. So I guess what we're saying is this is actually not a pointer. So let me just remind myself, if that's the case, is that actually what we're storing? It is. So what we probably want to do is say, look, this stuff here is what we need for a lot of this stuff. So we're probably going to want to import that over to here, right? Because we're going to be moving the things in here that are specific to the use, you know, to the stuff in here that's specific to user interface is going to want to migrate out. So a lot of these things that were previously welded into the debug system will move out to the UI, and the debug system will just retain its actual information about debug stuff. And so all of this will probably come through like, you know, something like this. And we will move the input processing that was happening here into here, slowly but surely. Okay, that answers our question about whether that should or shouldn't be a pointer, and it shouldn't be. So that's confirmed. So we should be able to kind of move on from there. These we renamed because they're not debug fonts anymore. They're just fonts that are used in the UI, and that's fine. Again, here just cleaning up things that were accessing the debug state. No longer need to do so. Pretty basic. So here we've got the dev UI context being pulled out, right, instead of the debug state. And so the layout, like so, can just be accessed the same way the debug state was. And then we can access any of the other things. It does mean that we've got sort of in the dev UI now, we want to pull those, again, those things that are basically all of these things here that we were using before. All of that probably lives over here now, right? And can be made with this system rather than the debug system. And probably a lot more of these will too, you know what I mean? As we come through, you know, this is obviously all debug specific. This is debug specific probably, maybe not, hard to say. Not debug specific, right? Debug specific and so on. So really what we'd be doing is, you know, pulling out a few of these, probably the tooltips, maybe, I don't know, it's hard to say. But basically pulling this stuff out that should be UI and not debug, just moving that out one by one, I think, is all we really need to do here. And it'll be a little bit of a slow going because there's so much of it to extricate, but it's easy work, right? It's it's just shoveling code at that point. So we're going to just pull these out here. The render group is arguably something that maybe should just get pulled out, you know, at the outset, because anyone who's drawing is going to do that. We don't really need to keep talking about it over and over and over again here. So let's just grab that in a more direct fashion. Here's all those push recs now. I'm just looking through to see if there's anybody else who's using it. Doesn't look like there is. So in here, what I'd like to do is pull that out, right, same way. And just make sure nobody else here is doing anything there. I don't think they are. Again, debug state in this case is really just the context in all of these cases. I'm trying to look to see if we've got any other debug state stuff going on. This is a different function. Looks like that's the first time it's used. Okay, so again, since we're going to need the dev UI context here, we'll pull it out from the layout. And then we'll just use the context everywhere we were using the debug state before. Should be fine. The render group doesn't really get used much here, so I'm okay with that still being sort of pulled from the pointer in this case. Let's see, starting baseline Y. So, you know, looking at that, I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, but the starting baseline Y, you can see here we've got a get baseline situation here. And this is font scale times the baseline. That just looks like it's just this call being re-implemented for no good reason. So we probably either forgot we had it, or we implemented this before we had it. And so really that should just be that call. And so I'm going to go ahead and put that back on there. Oops, did I accidentally delete a parameter there? Yes, I did. Okay, I see what happened. So what we need is just that, get baseline, context. And then I think we're good. There we go. So now you can see it lining up properly. Okay. So the rest of this is pretty clean, it looks like. Let me just highlight. I'm not sure why that was the old style of implementation either. I guess it's been a while since it's been this code. Maybe 4Coder didn't have it at that point we made it. I'm not sure. But looking through here, yeah, I don't see much else. Again, this is the get baseline call again, so it looks like we definitely thought we had to keep doing that, at least back at that point, but we really don't. So there we go. And again, this stuff here looks like mostly things that should get converted pretty directly. So I'll go ahead and do that. The render group's getting pulled out there. Tooltip transform, also something that we have now. Yeah, again, really pretty basic stuff here. Just basic porting, nothing particularly interesting. And that all looks pretty good. All right, let's keep going here. We'll just use the arrows to guide us again. So the render group in this case, it looks like we store a pointer to that rather than the actual render group in question. So we don't really need to do the address there. I guess we will keep it that way. We could make it so that it was actually stored directly in there, but I don't know that we want to. We'll think about that a little bit later on. So yeah, keeping going here, you can see we've got this debug line buffer thing. I don't remember much about what we did with tooltips. So I'm just going to try and take a look and see what we were doing. It looks like here we just create sort of some kind of a temporary holding cell for these things, basically. And I'm not really sure why we did it this way or who even cares about it. I mean, especially if, are these things kept? I don't know what the deal is with this. So I don't know much about this, but what I'll say for now is we'll just keep it as it is. We'll say that this thing is just a dev UI line buffer for now, and we'll maybe revisit what this wants to be a little bit later on. So we'll just say, like, because I'm pretty sure all this thing is for tooltips. Like, that's all it does. And so it probably, I can't think of a time when tooltips are just per frame. So really, you don't need it to be fixed size like this. It could just be created on the per frame memory stack. So, again, this might just have been a case of, like, early on in the dev stream, we don't have a lot of tools. So we do sort of the poor person's version of it, right? So I don't know. We'll see how we want to, deal with that a little bit later on. Okay, moving on. Let's see here. So here's the way we draw one of those things. And they pretty much port directly over, I think. Default clip rect in this case probably again wants to be something that's in the UI system itself. I can't see or think of a reason why it wouldn't be. Basically, all this stuff is over here now, right? In fact, we can kind of get rid of it. So I do wonder if we maybe want this to kind of be like this. You know what I mean? And so you just snap the pass in there as opposed to doing a pointer to it. It's kind of hard to say, but it seems like that's probably a good idea. I don't know. it might not be. And this stuff can go away here and just be replaced by this. So effectively what we would have is something like this, right? And you know, this context, it's not really a context per se. It's more just like the UI. So another thing we could say is that it's just that. And so it's more like this. You know what I mean? Because this is the central UI structure. It holds the permanent state. And so you more or less just can do that. The UI layout might be a better place for this render group because this is sort of permanently stored stuff. And this is what you actually do per pass. And so there's a strong argument one could make for moving this from here to here, just to be a little clearer about what's going on. So I think we should probably consider that when we're done with this pass through the code. So moving on, I'm just going to change these here. I'm going to change everywhere that we saw dev UI context to just be dev UI. All right. And this will change back to that. So where we saw context, I'm just going to rename that. And I think that's it. Okay, let's see here. So not really much to say here. Again, I would like to think about moving the render group around, so we may want to change that a little bit in a second here. But that's, again, a separate issue, sort of. Let's see, dev UI context. Again, that's going to sort of change to just be dev UI, just in case there was any more of those there. Let's see here. What else we got going on? Okay, so we know that's going to be coming from there now instead. Mouse text layout. So I guess that's the tooltip one. And so I guess we create sort of two of these things, two of these layouts. That, of course, would be a reason not to have it welded in there. Although it would be an argument. In other words, it does seem like maybe this is the correct structure, right? So when you're going through all of these things and you're going to render something and you need to do a render group, right? You probably need to pass it this way. And I'm just trying to think if that makes good sense. You know, we kind of got away with not doing it here because what people kept doing is they just passed the UI and they expect the render group to be in that. And you know, I feel like it maybe that wasn't the best idea. I feel like, though, I don't know. It's just a really tough call. I'm going to leave it the way it was because I just don't see a lot of benefits to doing it. I feel like it probably is a little bit wrong. And that's okay. Anyway, so if we are going to look at what the mouse layout was here, I think that may be a little bit janky. So what I think I'm going to do instead is say, look, you just pass me the one you want. So, you know, you tell me where you want this thing laid out and I'll lay it out that way. Rather than grabbing it out of here, which doesn't feel quite right to me because why would I have to know magically where that layout existed, right? So that feels a little bit better. Coming through here, so this right here, the dev mouse text layout, that's going to be a dev UI layout now, right? And now we should move on to stuff that was calling this stuff. This is just the dev UI, which I now have put up here, and I'll try to gather those things together a little bit better. So, you know, here's all the stuff we were using. So, you know, we've got this layout, the tooltips, and the dev UI, right? And that all kind of goes together. In terms of stuff here that's, you know, UI related, I could also sort of gravitate that more towards the bottom by sort of doing this. And this stuff maybe is what migrates over eventually. So, you know, this stuff will move. Because just looking at it here, right, like all of these things are debugger based. So this stuff, is all rightfully part of the debugger, and it should remain inside the debug system. And then I think this stuff here is the UI, so these will remain because it's how the debug system accesses those UI services. Or at least something like this will remain. It may get past this as well, because we might want to unify our editing and debug UI at that point. That seems totally reasonable too. But basically, we want to look at moving this stuff out as we go. Now, I don't really know what selected ID was for, because I don't remember us doing a lot of stuff with selection per se. So I couldn't actually say, like, I don't know that did we do stuff with selecting things? I don't think we did. Yeah, I'm not seeing much there. So I don't really know that that's getting used for anything anymore, but let's just see. So we had something like that. I just don't know how we ever produced one of those. We've still got the logic in there for it. I'm just not sure what we ever do with it. So it kind of looks like we just... You know, I'll be honest, it looks like we just... We're supposed to be able to hold down the shift key and multi-select? Is that true? I mean, it doesn't seem to do anything. We'll have to go see what that does. But that probably would go in the debug, in the UI as well, like multi-select, mine as well. I mean, probably, I don't know. Since we implemented it, we might as well keep it. So we'll play with that a little bit later on when I actually have some idea of what's going on there, right? Okay. So in here, when we're doing... Oh, I see what that was for. That was for multi-selecting things in the world. Okay, I get it. Yeah, you can see here, this was if you wanted to use that in... like in the game, like as something where you want to be able to select stuff that way, which again, I don't think I'm going to use because I don't really want that to be tied into the debug system. I want the world asset editing stuff to be stuff that you can do whether the debug compiled in or not. So we probably won't use that, but even so. Okay, so once we have the debug state, you should be able to do this pretty directly, I think, and go from there. What did we actually call this? Just dev UI? Yeah. So I think that's all we need to do for now on that. Debug ID interaction is actually dev UI ID interaction, really, but we don't really need to rename it at the moment. We can deal with those sort of renamings a little bit later. Again, this is just basic stuff that's reaching into the state and playing with it a little bit, and that's actually fine. All right, so render group in this case is probably something I just want to pull out here. So I'm just going to say like render group. And that comes from the debug state, the dev UI, right? And so we can just get that anytime we want. And now where we were doing the render group, that can just be passed directly. Here we don't have to worry about because we didn't do the arena occupancy stuff, so that looks fine. Let's see here. So UI transform, that's just going to be from the dev UI as well. So maybe what I could do here is just say, look, the dev UI is going to get pulled out. Or I'm going to try to anyway. And then inside here, we can just grab these from it. The tooltips, I don't know, because those are going to have to get moved out as well, so we'll have to actually do that at some point. Maybe ampersand there. Because these are not actually available right now, right? Because they're actually still in here somewhere, I think. Yeah. So I think we probably want tooltips to be sort of universal, right? Because like they're going to be handled by the UI always. So again, I think that just kind of gets moved up. You know what I mean? So probably the tooltips end up something like in here, because they're going to be things that you always can access inside the UI. So let's see. When we're doing the processing here for profile bars, looks like people tend to set the next hot interaction pretty directly all the time. I don't really know to what extent we want them doing that. Seems better if they were to make a call for that. I'll leave it this way for now because I don't really need to upgrade this system at this point, but it's a little janky the way that that's being done. So I figure I just point that out for the time being. For render group here, I'm going to go ahead and, again, pull that out at the top because it's usually something that people want to be able to use. So there's render group. And, you know, we probably want the dev UI as well. So something like this. And then everyone can get that as necessary. All right, so these are off of the UI now. I really wish, I don't want to have it go to the errors for the see also thing. But what are you going to do? So, yeah, in here, we're going to get the tooltips from the UI. That's going to be off the UI as well. that's going to be off the UI too. Is this a new function though? Yeah, it is. So we need the dev UI to be accessible here. And I think we're good to go. Oops. Text out's going to take the UI. Get text size is going to take the UI. I really hate that. I hate these little note jumps. They're so frustrating. They make it impossible to just quickly go through your code and fix the basic errors. Let's see. So I need to add something in ForCoder that skips those. There may already be something. Actually, I don't know if I have to turn it on. Because it looks like you could skip them by looking if you saw note : in it. You know what I mean? And I think it might have something like that already, actually. I think I saw something like that. I just haven't put it in mine. But I don't like them. All right, so let's take a look at tooltips here. So that's, again, just coming off of this. Nothing special happening there. Again, just looking at the UI. The render group pulled out here. And the UI as well. All right. I feel like we're making some progress here. Let me see. Quick render group. Yeah, you're right. That all looks fine. Nothing special happening there. Like, look at how many times it makes me look at stuff that's totally irrelevant. It's like, just go to the next actual thing I can fix. Okay. There we go. Actually, this should be pulled out directly the way we've been doing it. So only those should really be involved here. And I think we are mostly good there. That's all regular debug stuff. All right. So this is not a thing anymore. We don't have layout. We have dev UI layout. So I'm going to preemptively change it to that since we know that's what it actually is going to be. And then this stuff looks like most of this can flow through okay. I'm going to pull out the render. Oh, well, I already did. It looks like here previously. Just looks like people aren't using it for reasons I couldn't really tell you. But you know, you can see them right there not using it, right? So looking, everyone's capable of using that just fine. Go. That all looks good. Pretty basic stuff. Nothing weird happening here. Yeah, that all seems totally fine. Yep. All right. Yeah, so I don't see anything weird here. I mean, that all seems good. So I need to make sure that all these people who were taking a layout before are going to take a dev UI layout now, because we renamed that just to be clear about who was doing what and when. So this stuff here needs to have that placed in there. But other than that, there's really not much going on here. This is all pretty generic. Does look like we need the dev UI here. But otherwise, it's pretty reasonable. All right, so let's see. That's off the UI. That is actually this. So it looks like, because this is going to need the debug state, so it looks like this actually will have to be passed here, right? So we're going to, debug draw element's going to need to, that's going to have to flow through there in addition, which is a little bit of a pain in the butt, right? But that's just the way it goes. Not sure. Oh, that's just because that doesn't work on there anymore. This all looks reasonable. What is the problem here? Oh, so begin element rectangle may be something that takes a regular layout or not, does it? No, it doesn't look like that. So, it's just that. That's fine. So yeah, anywhere that was doing a layout element would have to take a dev UI layout element, which is fine. It's a pretty basic change. All right, so again, really non-glamorous stuff here, pretty basic, but it has to get done to pull this code out if we want to be able to use it sort of in the general case. So that's all fine. That's all fine too. Not much to do there. Oh God, it's so hard to just fix code when it does this. Look at how many there are, right? It just says all of this stuff. It's just, I gotta find a way to make that not happen. It takes so much longer. I'll have to look. I'll ask Alan about it. I may have already fixed that on mine. I'll have to see. I haven't updated this for coder in a while. I don't remember it being this onerous on mine, so I think I may have already fixed this because it probably would have driven me nuts when the compiler does that. So let's see. Again, I have to jump through 50 million things to find out where the next actual error is, which happens to be here. That's all fine. Let me see, skip the notes myself. God. There we go. This is another one of those get baselines, right? That all looks good. Debug draw element. Needs to take the debug state. All right. So we're getting down to it here. Like a lot of this stuff is non-UI related, right? Most of it, in fact. So that's pretty cool. Render group is off of the dev UI. What else we got? So begin layouts, I think, only needs that. It doesn't need the debug state anymore. I don't really know if any of these other things need anything different. I don't think they do, so I think that's pretty much just all there is to it, right? Let's see here. Undeclared identifier layout, correct UR. We renamed that. Otherwise, I think we're good. That all looks fine. So this stuff here, we could potentially share, or we could decide not to share it, and I'm not sure which of them we want to really do. Because again, sort of, we've got a lot of different ways that these interactions can work, and I'm not 100% certain how we want to start sharing those out. That's going to be the hairiest part of things for sure, because there's just lots of different ways to try and make those systems happy. You know what I mean? So I think at the outset, what I'll probably do is just say, look, I'm going to leave these as sort of doing their own separate functions at first. And then I'll probably try to make them come together a bit more after that. That's my guess anyway, and we'll see how it goes. Because I don't know that I really want these the actual logic here to be missable. Like, you know, I might want to keep them fairly separated so that the debug stuff gets compiled out completely. And so it's a little hard to say how we're going to want that data flow to go. There's a lot of ways that it could go, but, you know, we'll see. All right. So again, yeah, not really anything interesting to say here. Just manual text modification. And of course, it's impossible to actually update code because the compiler just really wants me to know about hundreds of other places in the code that are completely unrelated to the error. What are you going to do? By the way, did you know this other piece of code that has nothing to do with your error still has nothing to do with your error? Why, yes, I did. Thank you for telling me. Just didn't quite hit them all here. Nothing else to do there. All right. So let's see. Most of these are probably going to be these now too. So we will do that. And now it looks like, yeah, so I think now we're basically done. So now what we're going to want to do here is previously where this stuff was being set up, we probably want to roll this now into the UI system proper so that basically we, you know, all of this stuff, right, is just handled in the UI setup. And you don't have to worry about it separate from the rest of the system. So like probably what we want to do here is say, okay, inside the dev UI system, you know, probably in here, let me see, I want to kind of jump around. Let me see, what did we do for, did we ever initialize those? We didn't really. All right, so probably what we're going to want to do here, looking at the in-game editor, right? It never really gets an init call, and I think we probably want it to have one. So I think what I'll probably do is say, all right, you know, there's going to be an init here, and all of this stuff can go into it, right? So all of this here, except for the push font, I think that all just kind of wants to go in here. So I'm going to grab most of this stuff out. So yeah, like just looking at what's going on, I'm going to just say like pretty much almost all this. The global width, global height part, I'm going to leave because I don't really know yet where that's going to use. So we'll take a little bit of a look at that. I'm basically going to pull all of these out into sort of more of a UI start and end thing because we're probably going to need these UIs to link up to each other. Like I said, they're going to have to, we don't want them fighting over who's processing user input. So we're going to need that to be a little bit more systemic. So yeah, just looking at this stuff here, this won't have to happen because it's already going to be happening here. And maybe this is just something that will get passed down to the debug system when debug start is called. We'll try to look and see where that's actually happening and be a little bit more careful about it. But basically what it means is this won't have to happen there. Looking through here, yeah, the pushing the sort barrier on there. Does that actually do something? Because I don't think it does. Yeah. I was going to say we don't use that anymore. So that's over. So I think I think that's mostly it. So I think we're pretty good to go there. It's going to want to do its layout stuff here. And so I think I should kind of just be able to wrap this stuff up. So let's take a look at where that's actually getting called. Who's doing the actual dispatch, right? And so it looks like we're calling debug game frame end here, and then we're doing the start and the end that way, right? And the render commands are coming in here, but the question is like, how is the UI happening exactly? So I assume that's getting called in Win32, right? Probably. Yeah. So since the game memory gets passed to that, it's definitely a little bit tricky to link it up because what we would like to do is have the UI be accessible in both places, right? And I just don't know how we would do that. In order to keep the debug system completely isolated, it would seem to me that we wouldn't really be able to have it tie directly into the existing UI. And so that seems difficult. Like, there's a couple different ways that we could go about doing that. One way is we could make it so that the UIs don't connect. They're completely separate UIs. They happen to share all the same code, but they don't ever share any state. And then you either put yourself in debug mode, or you're either in debug mode or you're not in debug mode. You know what I mean? And when you're in debug mode, none of the other UI stuff works. So you just have, it kind of like takes over the interface, and that's all there is to it. And that seems reasonably compelling because then you just don't have any conflation of those two things. But I can't really say what I think about it otherwise. Like, I don't know. But I think what I'm going to say is I'm going to leave them separate for now. And maybe what we'll do is we'll maybe have it so that the debug UI stuff takes over when you're in that mode so that these two things don't fight with each other. Now, maybe you never really have to worry about them fighting because they're mouse-based interfaces anyway, and so they'd only fight with each other if they were overlapping or something. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I'm not sure one way or the other how I think that should go. But what I'm going to do for now is just say, look, we're going to have an init function, like an init UI. And it's going to set up all this stuff. When you actually go to do a render pass, it'll do this stuff more specifically, although I think we could just make it so that this happens. Yeah, it could happen in the begin layout. I'm not sure. So we'll see what we want to do with that in a second. But at the moment, we don't care about that part of it. So I'm going to port the rest of this stuff. Here's, how this stuff would go. We can do this one at any time. Right? And this one here for font ID, we kind of need to figure out which font we want and remember it. So but that's, again, easy enough. These things I think have to kind of happen every time in order to make sure the font remains loaded. Because if we stop using it, then it will get purged from the asset system eventually when it runs out of space. So that stuff all seems pretty basic. This has to happen every time as well. This stuff does not. So all of this can kind of just be set up one time, I believe, because it doesn't actually depend on anything. It's just Z offset nonsense that we're doing for sorting there. And let's see. So this default clip rect is also, all of this stuff. This is all the per frame stuff. So this is set up that would happen every frame. But this is set up that wouldn't. So all of this stuff, as far as the in-game UI is concerned, let's see here, dev UI, that stuff can kind of come in here. Yeah. So I think that's good. And it'll go through all of these things and initialize them, except for this, because these are basically like per. And all this stuff isn't. So I think that's pretty good. And again, like if you look at how this breaks down, it feels sort of like the dev UI layout itself would be the thing that would store these other elements, like the render group part and all that. But the thing about that that's a little bit weird is that you still kind of have two levels of that, because you could have multiple layouts that you do inside a single render group that's using, the same font and all that stuff, right? And the same tooltips pass and everything. So it's really more the case, and maybe it's like this, right? But it's still the case that like these things here are really sort of a dev UI pass sort of a struct, because they're not really a layout, because the layout you might do multiple times, right? And so that's really kind of confusing, and I don't know whether we want to bother having another one of those. Like, it doesn't seem necessary, so it's kind of like we'd be breaking up the structure just to be pedantic about it, which I don't want to do. But it is worth noting that it's like definitely a different thing. Like, this stuff is different, you know? So we're storing some stuff in here that really doesn't probably want to be in there, if we're honest about it, right? So we initialize it, and then every time we want to, begin a frame, we have to call it to initialize this stuff. And so then that's where this code goes, right? So inside here now, where's the font ID? It looks like we didn't save that. We want to do that as well, right? Yeah. So we want to be able to, like, get the font ID, get the font info and the scale, set up the transforms and all that nice stuff. We want to be able to do that and get all of that correct. And then we also want to initialize this stuff probably so, I mean, we don't really know what this stuff is. We'll set it to nonsense for now. And we'll zero these out just because I have no idea what else we would do with them. So all of that stuff would then be initialized properly at that point. And then we would need somehow in here, to every time we're going to go to begin a frame, we're going to have to call this stuff. And presumably we would also need an end UI frame thing here as well. Now, the thing that I don't know is, do we want to just link it up to an existing one? And that, I think, maybe is fairly compelling. That's why I was saying I think this render group should really maybe have been a pointer. I don't know. But it seems like it would want to, because you just want to tie it in with existing render groups. I don't know that there's any reason to have a separate render group. It's really hard to say. I just don't have a strong feeling about it. So again, I'm going to leave it that way. I don't know that that's really... There isn't a strong argument for it, but there isn't a strong argument against it either. It's just kind of like, hey, it doesn't seem quite right. And so, that's where we're at. So that all looks fine. The width should have been getting pulled out here from the commands, but it doesn't look like it was. I assume that's because of this, right? And so if I come through here, I can now get rid of most of this because this was just set up for this purpose. So I'm just going to do that and then get rid of all this. So when we go to do update in render editor, I also again want in here to be able to do an initialize editor. Now I want to be able to do this because I would like to do that, like I said, and then I also want to be able to call one of these. And as far as assets are concerned here, I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll keep passing that down. Seems okay. Sure. Why not? So yeah. So we'll initialize the UI that we're using. And again, we've got a couple of different ways we could do this. We can make the UI actually, and maybe we should just make the UI be something that the game has in general. In which case, actually, this becomes a little bit different, right? In other words, we could just say, all right, in handmade.h, we're actually going to stick the it in here, right? So there is one of these. Actually, I guess it's like that. You know what I mean? And then it will actually initialize that. And instead of initialize editor being something that does this stuff for you, instead what would happen is it just gets a UI to use when it's trying to do its editing, right? So it would be more like saying, yeah, okay, you know, you're going to initialize yourself. Great, good for you. When we call you here, we will pass you a dev UI to use, and that'll come from the game state. And then you'll just use that UI rather than making your own thing. So in here, where you do a dev UI layout, you'll do a begin layout, and you'll do it on this UI, and that'll be the end of it, right? Oops. So then all this stuff will just flow through there. Pretty straightforward, nothing fancy. And it also means that this commands doesn't have to be passed down anymore, right? Because it's not setting up any drawing, which I think is what we want. That seems a little nicer to me. That means in here, the initialization actually occurs in game update and render when we actually have to initialize some state. So in here, when we say like, oh, we don't have anything set up, then what we would do here is call the initialization functions at that time. So we'd initialize the editor and we would initialize the layout, I'm sorry, the UI as well. So game state dev UI and game state editor would both get initialized here. The assets would get passed down, I think in both cases. They're not really necessary here, but I'm going to say that since the editor edits the assets, it may be the case that we roll the assets in directly right here, and then we don't have to pass them down anymore. That seems a lot more sane, because if you look at how many times we've had to do that, it seems like a lot, right? So I think a more sane thing to do here might just be to say, look, that's just, you know, there's only one place these things can come from. We don't, you know, have some kind of an idea that we're that in some point in the future we're going to have like lots of different assets like pools running around that we need to like know which one we were talking about or anything like that. So I think this is a little more straightforward. That just seems a little bit better. Oops. This one I may keep because it's sort of actually talking about the assets more directly, and that maybe would go into the actual asset system, so I'm not going to touch that one at the moment. But all right. What else we got? Okay, so looks like for the UI frame stuff, so we have a left edge and a right edge and stuff like this. So I assume we want to keep tracking that. Like the default clip rect, however, I think is also probably just tells you that information. So I'm not sure to what extent that's really all that relevant. So I may say, honestly, I'm not sure I care about that stuff at the moment. We'll see what I think about that going forward. All right, so in in-game editor, I'm going to say like, look, it edits the assets, among other things, so it's going to keep the pointer to that, and I'm going to initialize it here. These don't need to pass the assets anymore. It just needs to pass the assets. Same here. Okay. So I guess going from here, now I need to start merging these things together in terms of their functionality as well. So yeah, like looking at begin UI frame, this stuff here, this needs to get called now in a sort of more centralized fashion. So in here, where we were previously doing like, you know, the hit test stuff and update and render editor. So I don't really know exactly how we want to treat the UI stuff as it flows through, but at the moment, I'm just going to do it only around the part that we actually care about. So in other words, this is sort of where that's going to happen. So I'm going to do begin UI frame here, and then I'll do end UI frame here. And so this will, I don't remember if assets needs to get past that, but let's just say that it does. So I'm just going to let that control how this works. This begin UI frame part won't really do anything in particular at the moment. It'll just say, look, I'm going to say it won't return anything in particular. It'll just set it up to go. And that looks fine. And so this will get the UI. And then other people who want to use this UI could use it. So we could call other editing things here. And we could even bracket more of this if we wanted to, and have it so that you could call different people. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we could do there. I don't think it's a particularly good idea. So I'm going to leave it as sort of a separate thing that happens outside. And then, like I said, I'm not going to try to do anything fancy there. I'm going to let the debug system call it separately and use its own sort of debug stuff. Now, debug UI.cbp is now dead letter, so it's not something that's going to be used anymore. So I can get rid of these two files as well. And I don't know that we do have a retired directory. So those are just going to go in there and not be around anymore. So that's starting to look good. I got to get rid of the debug UI include files. So that I don't know if we got any others. All right. And then the debug system itself has to actually call these when it wants to use them, right? So the debug system wants to be able to just, wants to be able to utilize the same system. And so the stuff that it was doing to end the frame in here also has to be the stuff, anything that was happening in the end frame part of things has to be done here as well. So just looking at that, I think we're basically just talking about just this stuff here. So I think that is basically it. Probably. I mean, it looks like it anyway. So I think that's what we would be doing. The mouse text layout stuff, I don't really know what that was for, because again, that's old debug stuff. Looks like it's stuff that was happening at the cursor position or something weird like that. Oh no, it was just using that for picking. So yeah, I don't really know what the point of this stuff is actually. I have no idea what the stuff is doing here. And so I'm not really going to play with it right now anyway, and I don't care. I just want to make sure this stuff works okay. So we're going to make sure this gets called on both ends. So it'll, be able to finish this up properly. And draw the tooltips and whatever, right? But then we also need to call this. So when we were going to do all this stuff before, like inside debug start or whatever, we want to be able to do this here as well, right? So, yeah. So we'll begin UI frame, get an end UI frame here, so this can be used, and then in here we would just need to do, when we do our debug init, we would also need to be able to do the same initialization for the UI system, right? So for the debug states, dev UI system, it's got to do it this way. Now, where it gets the assets, I'm not entirely sure, right? It needs to be able to get those somehow. Excuse me. And I'm not sure how it would be getting them when it gets initialized. You know what I mean? And so, like, I think maybe what it was doing was every time it would run, it would re-query for a new font. Maybe? And I'm not really sure. We could do that. So if we wanted to, we could move that query so that it happened every time. That way, when you initialize one of these, you don't need assets to initialize it. The advantageous part of that is if you updated the font, it would update properly by, if you added a better font match. Can't say that's particularly compelling. And I guess I don't really know much about how debug init actually happens either, so. I mean, it looks like it just gets the assets by asking for them, right? So it seems like you could just call that. And so maybe we try it. Yeah. Okay. So not much left to go over here. Again, a lot of changes necessary to make these things sort of separate working systems that can both share all the code. But again, only an hour or two of work is really not that much at the end of the day. So it is a lot of changes, but it's also not a lot of changes. So I'm going to take a look at the line buffer stuff here, just see what's going on there. It looks like it needs whichever layout we're going to do. And so like I was saying before, we need to kind of know what layout the tooltip should have. I'm guessing that we probably just want to use something about the mouse location to figure out where we want those to be. And it probably also depends on sort of where you are relative on the screen, which we at the moment don't really do much about. And possibly we should. we should possibly take a look at where we are and like readjust. Maybe draw line buffer does that. I don't actually know if it does. So that's sort of a separate issue. But we could go ahead and look at what like last mouse P was. That I'm not sure where we were setting. I suppose that's also something that should be set here. Like the mouse is going to have to be handled here as well. Right? Yeah. So we're also going to have to sort of start tracking that a bit separately. So for example, in here, we're going to need the mouse position that we're using for tracking, because you can see like there's a delta mouse value that needs to come through. That needs to be made more systemic up here. And I'm not sure exactly how we want to do that, but it probably doesn't want to be in here anymore, right? So, when you go through and start doing a pass on the UI, it probably wants to be something that's tracked in the UI system more explicitly and more directly. So probably something like, like this. Maybe like this. And so when you do one of these, you pass in the mouse P or whatever, right? And probably we want to make that be a little bit more involved. So maybe when you go to do one of these things, we actually do a lot of this checking for you. So, and also, that's more like that. And so in here, when we go to do the calculations of everything, we can compute it here, right? So we'd like set the new mouse position to be whatever it was. We would do the subtraction and that would actually be stored, right? So all of that information is preserved. So similarly, all this stuff here probably would also, all of this would all get rolled in there. Right, and so, we would want to sort of have all of this stuff get taken into account. We'd reset the mouse stuff, we'd do, the unproject and all that stuff. I think that's basically what we want. So here we would do this, and before we did any of it, we would do that. So that would get us the complete set of user interface parameters there that we would need. The alt UI stuff, whether or not the mouse was transformed and how far it moved in either case. I don't really know if the unproject wants to quite do it the way it's doing it there, but we'll keep, whether the delta wants to be in the original mouse space or in the unprojected space, hard to say, but at the moment we don't really do anything fancy enough to care. So I wonder what is begin layout taking such that it wants the two of those things, the mouse P and the upper left corner. Okay, it's weird, but fine. Since the UI has the mouse P, I'm not sure why we really need to be passing that down anymore, but I guess we'll look at that a little bit later too. A lot of the stuff could start to be cleaned up. I mean, all we're doing is really breaking apart the code here and putting it in various places. And a little later on, we may find that there's a bunch of stuff we can do to improve how things are working, right? Since we're going to call this or use this a couple times here, I think I'm actually going to do this. And because you can see how many times it gets used, I'd rather just be able to refer to it a little bit more conveniently. Okay. Sorry. I guess I did that in the opposite order. So since this is actually stored here, I guess I have to more do it like this. Oops. This stores it into the UI structure, and then this is a way to reference it more quickly, right? So I kind of have to go backwards with it, if that makes sense. There we go. And all right. So the draw line buffer now, what we need here is some way of making a layout for this. So we kind of need to do one of these here, which is the mouse layout or whatever it's called there, right? And so the mouse layout thing just has to do, I don't actually know, to be honest with you, that end layout does anything. I think it doesn't. Excuse me. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So begin layout, again, don't really think that this needs to happen. At the very least, you really don't need to pass it the mouse P, because that's going to be known by the UI system either way. So at the moment, that can go away for sure. And I think we could even get rid of it here because it doesn't really need to be saved. So really, it's just the upper corner that's the only thing that we need to do here. And again, I don't know where that's going to be, but let's just say it's going to be here for now. So we'll deal with that in a second. End layout, I don't know anything about, so we're going to take a look at it here. Looks like it just takes the layout in question, like so, and it doesn't really do anything with it. So then I think we can move on to this. I don't know where we're going to put this UI, so we're going to pass nothing at the moment, but we're going to figure that out in a second. The rest of these things, yeah, like you can kind of see we're going to want to pass all this stuff down. So probably what we want to do here is maybe something like this. And then looking through here, almost done with this very large pass. And we're probably still not out of the woods yet. We got a lot of stuff we want to now go through and clean up, but we're pretty good, right? So let's take a look at begin UI frame. So it needs the input. And I think this doesn't need these anymore, right? Because assets should not be passed here. All right, so that's all good. We got more to do. Begin layout doesn't need to pass mouse P anymore. So everywhere in the debug system it was doing that, doesn't really have to do it. We call debug init. We can just pass the memory. Well, although can we? How does it normally get the assets? Pray tell. So it normally gets them by looking at the game state that's stored off of the game memory, and then if it can get them, it can get them. All right, so it could easily do it that way. Now again, I don't really know whether I can call it that whether I can call this way. It's a good question. What I could do too is I could say, look, game state, oops, game assets gets passed here, so they can initialize the UI, and then maybe that back here we kind of do it like this, and pass it in this way, right? All right, so begin UI frame doesn't take what? Oh, it needs the input. Do we have that? Hopefully. Looks like only debug end gets the input, which is a little unfortunate. So we'd like to have that at the beginning, right? I would think. So I think I'll just do it. I think I'll just add it. Because I don't know that we care anything particular about that. It doesn't even really change the way in which these things are called. I'm also not sure the extent to which, like, why is width and height something that's passed in there? It's not used here. So really that should go away too, probably. So it should look more like that. And these don't need to be here. Also, does that init, do we care about those much either? I mean, they're pretty much just used here. I'm not sure this is a good way to do this anyway. So I think we probably want to get rid of that too. There's just a lot we could clean up now, which is nice. All right, so on debug end here, when we're calling this, in order to get the render group, that's going to want to come out of the dev UI. Other than that, not sure what else it needs to really know. Looks like this, I don't really know what this was for. I don't know what the draw trees part. Was that actually something we were using? It doesn't use that layout. So honestly, I think this is just nonsense, because this was just, all that was the thing for doing the tooltips, and we don't need that anymore. So I'm pretty sure we're just down to this. And off we go. So I'll go ahead and grab UI here. And that seems good. All right, so now I think we're back to just debugging. And I think we can implement most of the calls that we wanted now. Surprisingly, I would say, very surprisingly, all of that just worked, which is nuts, kind of. Even the tooltips worked. All right, so, some days you get lucky. I don't know how much time I have. Does anybody know how much time I have? Are we in the Q&A? Where are we? Insobot. What time did we start this thing? What did I start at? 3:30? Probably. So we got like 8 minutes, maybe. So let's see what's going on in here. I don't really know. Let's just take a quick look at what's going on in here. With like these end section, begin line, all this nonsense, right? So we now can start to merge these things together. And so like with the begin line and end line stuff, like we've got now ways of doing some of these things, because we've now opened up access to like all of the things that we had already written. So like, you know, these end element, advanced elements, all that sort of stuff. So begin row and end row is really begin line, end line, right? So we can just say that's what that is, and now everywhere that we were calling begin and end, we should be able to just do this. And now those can be calling into the system that actually does something, right? Because like I said, we already wrote it. And then when we want to do stuff like labels and stuff like that, we now just have to look and see what do we actually have here for for element drawing, right? And how are we previously doing that? So you can see that we have the ability to do these basic text elements here. So presumably, if we wanted to do some of the stuff that we had, like a button isn't particularly hard. We could probably just implement that way. I'm trying to think of what else we got here. Label F. So a lot of these things I think could be implemented in terms of basic text elements and some jumping around and squinkiness. I mean, because you can see right here, I mean, here it is. So button is just action button. So let me just go ahead and make that. And the only difficult part is we don't have interactions for these action buttons yet. So if we just do this, you know, I gotta do a little bit of work here to actually wire this up, but if we're talking about something like this, we've already got a label as well. So I think, you know, if we just define this interaction somehow, we probably can make it work so that we can get buttons working in short order. Oops, that's not what I want to do. So you can see we've already kind of got the UI appearing there, right? As I move around here. And so we're off to an okay start. But we just need to now actually put some of the rest of the stuff in there, right? Let's go in and try to get the rest of those in there. So for the other things in here, like, you know, the Boolean type size, that stuff, I don't actually know to what extent, let me look in the renderer here. So I don't know to what extent we need to look at like frame-based memory here. I don't think... I don't know to what extent we have sort of support for this, but like you've got this frame arena, right, that can stick stuff on it. And I don't know to what extent any of these things need that. Like they're dumping the they're dumping stuff on here that's basically, yeah, so they're just dumping lists of drawings on there. So I guess we don't even really need to save any of this stuff. So for the most part, we can just use local buffers to print out what these things are and then be done with it, I think. So it's actually pretty easy to do. So yeah, so I mean, I think, and it's not necessarily the best way to do it, but I think you could really just do this. Oops. You know what I'm saying? And then print it out in here. Now, we need to actually thunk through to this because they're passing us an F as well in here. And so we kind of need to do this version of it only because we have to use the VA list. So we need to do like, VA start, VA end kind of a thing. I don't remember exactly how that goes. So we'll just look at it here. Here we go. And here we go. So that. And then once we have that, we can just call the label function afterward. So that gets a little closer as well. And so, yeah, that's almost the rest of the UI. And now we just need some of the other editable types in there, which again, I could throw in pretty quickly, I think. They're not actually editable, but if we were just wanted to see them, right, they're just like, they're all like that. And I think that's it. So you can see that this will come together pretty quickly, actually. Or at least I think it probably will. So yeah, not bad. We'll go ahead and go to a brief Q&A, and then it seems like we'll be in good shape for next stream to go ahead and get the rest of that UI done. Looks like we are question free. So that makes it pretty easy. All right. if we got no questions, we can wrap it up. All right, thank you everyone for joining me for the episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you as always. If you would like to follow the series at home, you can always pre-order the game on handmadehero.org, and it comes with a source code so you can play around with it. I will be back for the next surprise stream sometime, I can't say when, at a surprising time. But you can always check the watch schedule. I do put the surprise ones on there, you know, within a couple of minutes of when they're going to start as well. And the Twitter feed also gets updated. So I think probably pretty soon we'll do another stream. And we'll just go through, because I want to get the UI stuff done as well, and then we can start playing around with the art assets a bit, which is also kind of fun. So hope to see you back here for the next surprise stream. Till then, have fun programming, everyone, and I'll see you on the internet. Take it easy, everybody.